Thank you very much for joining in this evening and welcome to the program. This is Unit 8 we are covering today, and we have 3 more units to go after this. Today we have a very special guest joining us. Is Mr. John Fraser from USA. John has been a very close friend of ours. In fact, my mentor in all these programs. And even I was not a person who has been working in this area for my entire life. I actually switched gears around 2014, 13, like that. And it is after meeting John, Richard, and Ashley, and a few other experts who have been working in this area for decades, actually helped me to switch my career from being an engineer, innovator, to actually uh, to to deep dive into this area and to generate my specialty this area. So therefore, I'm really appreciative and thankful for John for all what he has done so far. In fact, in the development of the technology transfer apparatus in Sri Lanka, John has been instrumental. We have been able to put up technology transfer apparatus at Moratuwa because of John and few other people, very few other people. And most of the things we introduced at Moratuwa were actually checked and guided by John. And that is why we have not been in trouble all this long, and everything we did actually worked for us. So without further ado, I would like to ask Purnima today to formally introduce our first speaker, John Fraser.
Thank you, Professor Rohan. Good evening, everyone. Our first speaker for today is Mr. John Fraser, the president of Burnside Development, a personal technology transfer consulting firm. Mr. John Fraser has worked with all throughout countries such as Brazil, Chile, Malaysia, Mexico, Thailand, Philippines, Serbia, Sri Lanka, and USA. Also, Mr. Fraser has been an entrepreneur, providing his expertise as an entrepreneur in residence at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And he has also acted as an expert witness in several university industry lawsuits. Furthermore, Mr. John Fraser has founded 4 academic technology transfer offices in Canada and USA. In the year 2006-2007, Mr. Fraser was appointed as the president of Association of University Technology Managers. And apart from this, Mr. Fraser has also worked as the vice president of a venture capital investment firm. Finally, Mr. John Fraser has obtained his master's in biochemistry from the University of California. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. John Fraser to continue with the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Good morning, John.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. And here we are. Click. 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 Okay. Jeez. Okay. Rohan, can you hear me?
Yeah, you hear well.
All right,
John.
good. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk today about how to develop a technology product. I think this fits in with your class about raising financing, because in order to raise financing for a company, people will want to invest in a company that can or has developed a product that will sell in the market. The cash flow will come in of sales will come into the company and add great value to the company, so that later, when the investors cash out their position, they will have made money. In the venture capital field in America, when you invest, you expect to make 5 to 7 times your money back after within a decade of having invested it. So having products ready to go into the market is absolutely key. So let me now advance, right? This is my background. My undergraduate degree, I'm Canadian, was Carleton University in chemistry in Ottawa, Canada, back when the earth was cooling. Okay, first I'm going to talk about the old way of creating a product to show you what has changed. It used to be to create a product, it was a very tangible product. This is before the days of the internet. And the way it was done, you created a company that was totally vertically integrated. What does that mean? I'll explain what that means by showing you this. This is an aerial photograph of the Ford Motor Car Company Rouge River plant in Detroit in the United States. It opened about 100 years ago, and it was vertically integrated. It was considered the most sophisticated manufacturing plant on the globe. What happened was that sand, rubber, cloth was shipped in on ships in the Rouge River, which is here. And then 28 hours later, a full Model A car was ready to be sold. In other words, the complete vertical integration meant that you started with the starting materials and you ended up with a finished product. Everything was totally controlled, owned by, and operated by the Ford Motor Company. This worked incredibly well to create cars, later tractors, later then airplanes for World War II. And in the 1930s, as you can see, it had 90,000 workers. And the space here was twice the size of a regular university campus, to give you an idea of how large this whole thing was. So that's what I mean by vertically integrated. And I'll show you what a picture. Here's the vertical nature. The design of the car was done by Ford people. The raw materials were obtained by from Ford Motor Company owned steel factories, plate glass factories from the cloth. All these parts were put together, tires, batteries, components. They were assembled on an assembly line. Then the finished car was then ready to be marketed. The cars were shipped to distribution centers, local distribution car lots, which at that time, 100 years ago, were owned by the Ford Motor Company. So the entire operation was vertically integrated all the way from the starting materials down to the finished product. So that was high-tech product development back 100 years ago for tangible products, long, long before the internet. So here's how it worked. Everything went in the front end and things came out at the back end that were then sold. Very straightforward. If you're interested in more information about the closed innovation paradigm and the open innovation paradigm, which is how things are done now, you can look for Henry Cheseborough's papers. He's a Berkeley professor. This is the open innovation, where the materials come from many sources, not simply the source owned by the company. Technology comes from many sources. It goes into a manufacturing pipeline. Cars come out the other end, say dealing with a car. But interestingly, all sorts of things can happen along the assembly line. You can bring in technology from outside, services such as painting of the cars. You can take finished, say, car seats and sell them to another car company that then incorporates them into their products. Therefore, you can have technology spinouts based on either products or particular knowledge of technology. Say, the knowledge of how to apply paint to the car so that it is uniform, it sets evenly, and the paint has a nice gloss to it. It's a high tech knowledge base that could be sold by a company that has perfected it and then licenses it to others for their own use. So that's the open innovation. In other words, parts of the manufacturing product come and go. Again, this is a picture of what has happened. If you are developing a product today, it's highly likely that you will go through each and every one of these steps. You'll take a look and decide you've got some ideas for a product. You then write it down. You can then seek patent for the intellectual property to protect it. You can then create a prototype. You then look at developing the prototype into something that could be fairly simple to manufacture or engineer. You then go outside and ask the market what it is that you have. Is it of interest to them or not? That is customer discovery, which is done at this stage. You then take the market feedback to decide on the features of the product, and then finally you begin manufacturing, market, and sales. This in the United States is typical, a list of the sources of financing and investment for a technology-based company. Like Sri Lanka, America has national agencies that support basic and applied research in the science area, or National Institutes of Health, or corporations themselves can finance research that they're interested in. In America, we've got a program at the federal government level called the Small Business Innovative Research, SBIR program. It has $3 billion that's available to small companies to go through this process. Along the way, when you create a company, you start looking for angel investors, maybe corporations. You can seek additional grants. It's at this point that angel investors might consist of friends and families who invest in the company early on when you're still trying to sort out what the product might be. Later, as you begin the sales, you've got internal money that can help finance further work. And then you might turn to outside professional venture capital, which is different than angel investors. Professional venture capital accumulates money from a variety of sources, looks at projects, invests it, and helps the company grow. And it's at this point that the investors are looking to make 5 to 7 times their money over 7 to maybe 10 years. And then lastly, as you begin to scale up and actually manufacture the product, large scale, tangible products, you're going to need further equity financing. You might have to go to the bank and get a loan, commercial debt, to build a manufacturing plant that then leads to, as it says here, a viable business where the product is sold and the cash comes back into the company to grow the company. So that's the mechanism. Now, usually people who start their careers or are educated as engineers learn as engineers how to invent, design, build, test complex systems, complex structures, all to a goal of a product that works. And in addition, the critical aspect nowadays of being an engineer is you do all this for somebody within the limitations of cost, safety, certain regulations if it's pharmaceutical or you're building a bridge, and it has to be very practical. So people with these types of backgrounds are useful to be part of a company to help with product development. Equally so, you can take people who are life science people, who are used to lab bench work, who can contribute to a life science product, maybe a medical device, maybe a pharmaceutical drug. And nowadays, engineers or biologists who are skilled with software development can develop products for the internet, where the cost of the product is relatively small, the scale up is relatively modest, but the reach on the internet is global, depending on how interested people are in using your product to achieve a goal. So how do you evaluate the feasibility of a new product idea? I've got an idea. Is it a good idea or a bad idea? I'm not talking about whether you could build it. I'm talking about whether people are interested in buying it. First, you define the application and the product. Let me give you an example. When I was working at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida, an engineering professor came to me and said, look, I have a technique which is a dipstick technique that you can use it for a sample of blood. And if a person is in an accident, say a car accident, you can take a drop of their blood and tell whether the person not only has a broken bone, that should be physically obvious, but whether the person has had a heart attack using the dipstick technology. Turns out that certain proteins in the blood are at a much higher level after a heart attack. And so this was the idea for the product. Turned out the professor had a cousin who was a technician in an ambulance truck. And this cousin thought this product would be of great use because whenever the ambulance went to an accident, they looked at people who were hurt. And if they had a test like this, they could treat a person properly for a heart attack. Otherwise, there was no such test. And if you didn't treat the person properly, they might die because they were not treated properly. So such a test could enhance the ability of the technician to properly diagnose how to treat the patient and make them better. So he tried it out. It worked. We found a ambulance company that used it a couple of times. It worked decently well. And then we realized that he then created a small company and realized he was not going to sell the product to his cousin directly. He had to sell it to his customer, which were the emergency response vehicles, the ambulance companies, who would then have their technicians be the users of the product. So, having figured out what you think your product is, you define your product, as I said, and then you create what is called a value proposition statement. This is the format of the wording. And so you, for the named customer, in this case, the ambulance company, your technology, the dipstick technology, offers features which are on-site rapid detection of the elevated height of proteins which are indicative of a person who's had a heart attack. And so this describes the product. This allows the named user, the technician in the ambulance, to achieve the action, which is higher certainty whether the person has a heart attack or does not have a heart attack. Turned out that if you treat a person for a heart attack and they don't have a heart attack, it can hurt them. And it solves this problem. In other words, a more certain detection of who has a heart attack, better than the name competition. And the cousin stated that there was no other way other than the knowledge and experience of the technician of the ambulance company. So this is the value statement. You figure out the product and some of its features, and then attempt to fill in the blanks here to see what it is that you have. Once you do that, you can then evaluate the business feasibility. And here's how you could do that. Having decided what your product is, what the features are, having reached out to the market to get market feedback that yes, they're interested in such a product with such features at perhaps such a price, you can then independently, internally take a look and decide on the development and evaluation of your product. And there are 10 points you can ask yourself and think about. First of all, you describe the invention and how inventive it is. In the case I've described, it was very inventive. What's the value of the intellectual property? You do a patent search, a prior art search. Turns out nobody else has sought a patent in this area globally. It might be the case. You then ask yourself how relevant it is to the market of accident victims, and you find that it is of great value. Could it be used in a hospital? If a nurse comes into a room where a patient's recovering from a broken leg and they seem highly distressed, you could quickly determine whether they've had a heart attack or not. Highly relevant. You then ask yourself, what's the market size and characteristics? You could say, how many ambulance companies are there in Sri Lanka or in Southern Asia? And begin to sort out the size and characteristics of who will buy. You then ask yourself, okay, that's the ambulance user market. What about the hospital user market? That might be independent and another completely different market. You then ask yourself what the value proposition is, as I mentioned. Then the potential economic value of your product. Will the ambulance companies be very interested in this because it's something that is a pain point for them? That raises their ability to give the proper level of care. It might be also they see it as an insurance against being sued by the family of someone where the ambulance misdiagnosed the person and treated them properly. Such a test could prevent misdiagnosis, but have significant economic value. What stage is it? Well, very early stage. The TR, technology readiness level, is very low, 1 or 2, and you want to raise it up through internal development to 3 or 4, at which point people will be interested in investing. You then look at the scale up feasibility. Is it easy to scale up, or does it require some exotic, very expensive substance as part of the product? And the more you scale it up, the more expensive it becomes until you've priced yourself out of the market. You can't scale it up because of that unique product. And so you'll look to eliminate it and find something else that might replace the product with something less expensive. You then ask yourself, how on earth am I going to find the money, the people, and the other resources to put together a team to manufacture a product? And then lastly, you ask yourself, are there partners out there that I can contract a piece of the work outside my own company and have others do it and give me the results? So you can take a look at the feasibility of your business product by asking yourself and trying to find answers to these 10 questions. Then, having done that, the latest way to compile this information into a proper story is the business model canvas, a creation out of the California several years ago. There are 9 boxes here. You take the information you've created and ask yourself, what's the value proposition? Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Then you say, who are the customers? How do they look in the market? And what's your relationship with them? In other words, how do you sell to them? Do you sell directly to them, directly to the consumer, the ambulance company, say? Or Do you sell to a distributor that then sells to the ambulance company? You might want to do that if you're based in Sri Lanka. You want to sell in India, and rather than have a sales force in India, you partner with a company that will then distribute your product and share the sales price with you. Given where you are in your thinking and your product development, what are the key activities that you need to take to move forward to create a product that you can manufacture and ultimately sell? You need to list those. You need then to decide with these key projects and activities, who might you partner with to take on the burden? You might not be an expert in the packaging of the product for the ambulance company. Okay, you're an expert in the technology of detection, but packaging into an easy to carry around product that has instructions, it can open easily, it has all the pieces right there, and it records what the answers are. You might want to partner with someone that can develop that for you. You pay them and they provide that information, and they may even manufacture the empty cases into which you put your technology. Having done that, you then again determine how you're going to get at and sell your products, what channels of distribution you're going to use. You summarize what key resources you need. They're pretty straightforward. They're money and people. If people, is there a particular type of expertise you need? And then lastly, you take a look at what your costs are to develop the product. You can sort that out, how much money you're going to need, how you're going to spend it, over what period of time. And then lastly, you begin to hypothesize what your revenue streams are. Perhaps there's a stream of sales in Sri Lanka, then you expand through a distributor into India, and then you expand further into other countries and other markets in South Asia. If you have an internet product, things become a lot simpler. You put it out on the internet and then market it to different types to draw the attention of people to the availability of the product and tell them how they could buy it through a local to them, a local source. And having done that, this is an interesting aspect. I'm near the end here. You determine that you need to create the original product, which is the dipstick. And so with respect, this is a slide with respect to what the next generation of product is going to look like and the generation after that. This is the original product here. It has certain functionalities, certain features, and you offer it at a certain price. You then decide that you can add features and you might offer the extra features added to the product at a higher price. And therefore you migrate from here up this point to offer this product. Might be that this is the type of product that you need to sell, not to the ambulance technicians, ambulance companies, but to the hospitals. And you need to make it consistent with other products in the hospital. It needs to conform to certain regulatory requirements to be used in hospitals. Disposability, can you autoclave it to get rid of it? It might be that you look here and decide, no, I want to make a lower cost product, okay, but with the same functionality. If you have, say, a product with a computer chip in it, it might be that you can get a cheaper chip made with fewer features, and therefore you can lower the price and either lower the functionality or keep the functionality. And so when you've thought up the product and gone through the process that I mentioned, you then go out and decide where in the marketplace you could offer your original product and what features you have. When you do that, you detect the hospitals are interested in your product, but they want a couple of more features. And you can then think about, okay, I'll start selling here. I'll generate sales, the cash comes in, and I can then develop another product in, say, 9 months for the hospital market and have a different product distribution chain to sell to those customers. So again, I have been talking to you about how to develop a technology product. And it's important not only that you've got a product that you can sell, but a group of angels, friends and families, or even a professional venture capital company is very interested in what your product is going to be, how well it will sell into the marketplace, and then how you can evolve your product into a next generation that might serve different markets. So I'll stop there and ask if there are questions. Rohan?
Thank you very much, John. I think it was so simple but complete, and I think it went right through the brains of our participants who are trying to build their innovation journey, startups, and so on. We have a question in the chat room. I will read it out for you, John. We are providing web-related services. As an example, web content writing, blog, etc., website development, and so on. So what, it's not very clear the question here. Can we continue as a company with this technology development, especially with AI? We are providing unique and quality service. Please explain with your experience. Thank you.
Okay.
Hevapati, if you want to elaborate on that, I'm not sure whether I explained it correctly. If you don't mind, please unmute and ask your question. In that case, John, please proceed.
Okay. Fundamentally, what's on offer here is a web blog providing information. Where you take this company will depend on the response of people to your blog. I don't have a lot of experience in this particular area, if that's part of your question. The other answer is you can offer subscriptions to your site. You can offer services of how you can help others create blogs, say, and build a business. You can then talk about specialty topics. In other words, blogs on how to create an internet product for paralegals working in a large legal office, how they can improve their personal development and upgrade their skills in order to achieve salary increases in their law firm. You might then offer a very different specialized blog to people who are farmers, frankly, and talk about how they can better predict the weather in their part of the country in order to decide long-term what type of seeds they need to plant, whether through databases that are available that help predict what the weather is going to look like in 6 months, whether it's going to be a season of drought, and therefore the seeds to be planted need to be drought resistant, or whether the monsoon is going to come through augmented even worse than it was 5 years ago, and therefore you have to have seeds that can grow in extremely wet soils. So that's my answer to the question.
Thank you, John, for that. If there's any other questions, please post it on the chat. So while we are getting questions, here there's another one. Is there any threat from AI for our company? I think this is follow-up question from the same participant.
Well, artificial intelligence has sprung into the broad awareness of everybody within the last year with ChatGPT. And I think AI can be a very helpful tool in that it can gather information that you can present on your blog to your clients in specialized areas. You can use AI to keep scanning the internet for new information that's provided on a daily basis and condense it for your use. Or it can help you if you define what a product might be with certain features. You can then ask AI, what are the best practices to develop a product with these features for this particular market? And it might find for you engineering best practices, which you then use if, say, you're going to sell such a product that is mentioned into the hospital market. There are very rigorous requirements in the hospital environment for products that are used inside the hospital. These are usually regulated at the national level. So again, AI, I think people are concerned about its use, but I think there's huge potential, and people will become more relaxed about the use of AI as it becomes more common to use. And people will concern themselves with the abuse of AI, which will lead to regulations to make it safe and easy to use by the general consumer. So that's my answer there.
Thank you. Excellent, John. And I want to just reissue on a few things John mentioned, which are extremely important. Think about open innovation for all our participants, right? Try to bring in resources that are already available. Don't have to do it everything yourself. Then when you got an idea, it's better to check whether it is commercially viable so that you can make a business around it. Do not just jump in on every idea that comes to your mind, right? Please make sure that you do your homework and figure out which of these ideas are actually commercially viable so that you can build your business around it. And also, John said, use the internet resources for your advantage. Please do that by all means. And also figure out who is your customer. You can directly sell to certain customer segments, or you can commercialize through agents and other entities, and who will then sell it to the users and customers. Think about all these possible ways of bringing your product into the market. All right. And also, very importantly, value proposition statement. You will find this in the lecture notes also. Value proposition. I think this is something you need to do your own with regard to your business. Write it down, then you figure out what is missing in you so that you can fix that problem before you get going. And John also presented the triage scoring template that is 10 points, 10 questions. So you have to ask these questions from yourself. Most of you guys sometimes do not ask questions yourself, whether I have this one, whether I have that one, and so on. So John has presented 10 points. You have to answer all these 10 questions yourself and make sure you have everything already prepared so that you can start your journey. And also that this leads to business model canvas. We have already discussed that in a previous session. And also, once you have a product, you can change it to low cost, high cost, like fewer features, advanced features, etc., to suit different market segments. So this is very rich set of information for young entrepreneurs, those who are starting their businesses. I think for that matter, this is a very, very important lecture presentation, John, and I thank you very much and really appreciate your time devoted for us today.
Thank you, Rohan. I'd like to make one further comment.
Please.
We talked about questioning how it will be seen in the marketplace early on. The best place to start is in the family. Just talk to your spouse and others about what they think and get immediate feedback. And the second thing is, it used to be that people would sit in a room and create a product, write a business plan, perfect the product, and make it really perfect, they thought, and then introduce into the product. The thinking nowadays is take a take a product that's not fully formed, take it out into the marketplace, even if it's not fully formed and complete, get feedback, change. So the idea is question where you are to get started, your local folks, your families, and then begin and move fairly quickly to obtain market feedback and use the market feedback to improve your product and enhance sales. So that's it, Rohan. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And you and I'll get back to you about talking further about other projects at another time.
Surely.
Thank you for the again, and enjoy the rest of the class.
Thank you very much, John. Have a good day. Bye-bye. All right. So now it's time for us to introduce our next speaker, Purnima.
Our second speaker for today is Dr. Venura Velagedara, who is an economist and a senior lecturer at University of Moratuwa. He has also worked as a consultant in the development economics to the United Nations Development Program. As a financial researcher, Dr. Venura has interests in behavioral finance, asset pricing, and investments. And as a lecturer, Dr. Venura's teaching interests lie in the areas of corporate finance, investments, capital markets, statistical modeling, financial modeling, and fundamentals of finance. Dr. Venura obtained his PhD in finance and his Bachelor of Commerce from the Deakin University. And finally, his master's in applied finance he obtained from Monash University. So without further ado, I would cordially invite Dr. Venura Velagedara to continue with the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Purnima, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to address all of you in this national program. So let me just share my slideshow first of all. Yeah, so I think I'm talking after a very rich discussion by Mr. John Fraser, and he introduced you the concepts of product development and how it is important in the context of raising finance. So in my talk, basically, I'll be looking at kind of an overview of what is important when it comes to an entrepreneur or a new entrepreneur, particularly when it comes to how we need to raise funding and the different types of funding, as well as the importance of the characteristics, if you like, that we need to have in order to raise finance, etc. So basically, if I give an introduction, it will be these few points that I'll be focusing on. First of all, the need to raise finance. So why is it that we need to raise funding in the first place? Why does an entrepreneur have the need to raise funding, and what point usually does that need occur? And the different methods of raising funding at different stages we will understand as well. The characteristics of a business that would attract investors. So here I am looking at the overall business perspective, whereas I think Mr. John Fraser focused extensively on the product. So you have a good idea about the product already. So overall, what is a good business when it comes to particularly a new business that will attract funding is something we are looking at. And certain tools that we use to raise funding, like a pitching deck, for instance, which is important when it comes to going out there and approaching investors is something that we will look at as well. And then how we need to make sure that we can attract investors and engage with them is something that we will understand. Okay, so the need to raise funding is something we need to understand clearly. So why would a business, and at what point do they need to raise funding? So obviously they will start out probably what we call using bootstrapping or using their own money, or maybe getting money from their friends and family, etc. But at some point, they will really need to go out there and raise funding in the form of maybe from different sources like angel investors, venture capitalists, etc. So generally, we need money for several reasons. First of all, for business or product development, as I think Mr. Fraser explained to you, the different stages of product development, etc. So we need funding for product development to make sure that our product is good enough before it is commercially a good fit for the market is something it is important, because originally it starts as a idea in the entrepreneur's head, and then we slowly develop it into a commercial product, but that is not enough. We need to further develop it to make sure that we can attract the target market that we require. So it is important in that context. Secondly, money acts as a barrier to entry. So obviously, in a market context, barrier to entry is obviously not a good thing. So when a company or when a new business cannot enter the market due to some barrier, we call it a barrier to entry. So funds initially, if the company does not have funds, that acts as a barrier to entry because they can't differentiate, they cannot adapt to the same pace that their competitors would do, and they lack that ability in that sense to develop products or meet with various external threats, etc. So money can act as a barrier to entry. To stop that from happening, we need to raise funds. C is, of course, to grow your business network. So this might not seem obvious. However, when you raise funding, you are actually creating a network of investors. You're bringing in new expertise to the business as well. So the founders, originally, they may be programmers or engineers, or they might have a specific skill. However, when you bring in new investors, you are actually growing your network. You're growing your resource pool, if you like. So it's something important, something that we don't think of necessarily when it comes to funding. But an angel investor is not just a person who provides funding, is also somebody who provides guidance, somebody who has technical expertise in different areas, or industry expertise in specific areas, etc. So we need funding sometimes in order to grow our network in that sense. Further, for expansion and development at later stages, once we are ready with the product, once we have a proven product with a certain market segment, then we can expand the market further, or even go for new developments which are not the original product, but we are issuing products, different segments, etc. So expansion and development will come at a later stage, of course, not at a very early stage for the entrepreneur. However, it is also something where we will raise funding. So working capital management or cash flow shortages is something that affects small businesses a lot. So if you look at the general context in Sri Lanka, for instance, during COVID-19, many smaller businesses could not survive due to working capital shortages, due to the fact that they simply could not pay their bills, and because simply their inflows were stopped and they could not afford to keep on track of their payments, and they could not survive. So due to that sort of thing, we need to make sure that we have sufficient amount of cash in order to run our business, and working capital management is also a need sometimes we have to raise funding. So we have different needs to raise funding, but I think the main one out of this would be the product development, as Mr. Fraser explained earlier. So what are the different types of funding? So it's indeed important for us to understand, and at a broad level, what these different types of funding are. So we have generally equity, debt, and hybrid assets, hybrid securities, in other words. So when we raise funding, we can raise in the form of equity. Equity is very plain and simple. The amount of money that our owners have put into the business. In other words, we can call it ordinary shares. So if we go and if an investor invest money with you in the form of equity, that would mean that that person is a part owner of your business. So equity will mean also that when somebody comes and invests with you, you're giving away a portion of your ownership as well. So debt, on the other hand, is anything like bank loans, for instance, things like equipment finance, any lines of credit, anything like that can be debt. So a debt is basically, as you know, somebody lends us money, that would come under debt. So in the early stages of a business, we wouldn't expect a lot of debt to be there because it's very difficult to show a cash flow for a business or a profit in that sense to actually borrow money. So apart from things like small business loans, which are given at relatively concessionary rates, we wouldn't expect a lot of loans to be there at early stages of a business. However, a debt, as you would understand, we have to pay interest. We have to pay a guaranteed cash flow back to our investor. Whereas equity, we do not need to do that because they are our owners and we will be paying a dividend which is variable. Hybrid securities are preference shares, so we call them preferred stock, which is a combination of equity and debt in a way, because we pay a fixed dividend to our investor, and they have preference over ordinary shares. I mean, as the word tells you, it is preferred stock, so which means that they will gain preference over ordinary shareholders in many cases. For instance, when the company pays dividends or a share of profits, which we call dividends, to the shareholders, generally preference shareholders will have preference or priority over our ordinary shareholders. And the event of bankruptcy also, debt and high preference shareholders will always get priority over equity in all cases. So in our case, though, we focus on equity. The reason why we focus on equity is because, as I mentioned, it's very difficult to raise debt in the first or early stages of a business because we don't generally have a lot of profits. It's likely that we are having losses because it's not a proven concept. We are still developing. We are in the seed stage or still kind of conceiving the idea and fine tuning the commercial aspects of it. So it's likely we are not making any profit. So if that is the case, no bank or no debt investor would actually invest or give funds you in the form of debt, because they need usually a proven income stream before they give out a loan. So more or less, we'll talk about equity in our discussion, and also we'll be talking more on equity sources, which are important for startups and early entrepreneurs, because that's where most of the money will be raised. So as I mentioned, equity, if I reiterate certain things I mentioned once again, so we can raise equity by selling part ownership of the company. We call them shares, in other words. So when we are kind of issuing equity, what we are doing is we are giving a chunk of our business to the investor, and we are raising funds in turn. Holders, we have to pay them interest or debt service payments or anything like that. So it's not a regular guaranteed payment that we are paying back in any sense. However, we do have to pay dividends, and dividends are not guaranteed, as you would understand. So it's like if we have profits, we would pay a dividend, but it's highly unlikely that at early stages of a company, like for instance, even if you look at Tesla has not paid a dividend yet. Microsoft paid very little dividends until 2003. So many tech companies particularly don't opt to pay dividends. So they can do that because of the nature of equity. Equity financing does dilute ownership, though. When we're giving away part of the ownership, the founders or the original entrepreneur who founded the business loses out their stake of the company, as we would understand. So, as I mentioned, those who invest in a startup have to be able to take on a certain amount of risk. So it's not that any investor, any kind of, we call it in normal layman's language, mom and dad investor can invest in a startup company. It's mostly people or firms or individuals who can take on that risk initially. So we have very specific types of methods that we use to raise funding for the early stages of a company or a startup. So I've given some examples here. First one is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is a rather simple one, but it's also the most obvious one for many businesses. Bootstrapping is basically when you kind of put your own money into it, when you borrow from friends and family and put your own money into the business. That's what we call bootstrapping. It comes from the kind of interesting um, uh, uh, kind of story where people used to put their money in their boots long ago. So I think when original, I mean, the pioneering entrepreneurs, when they wanted to start a business, they would pull out everything they had and simply invest in the business. So bootstrapping, in a way, is simply putting all your money into it, and there's a limit as to how much one do, obviously. So we have other sources like venture capitalists, angel investors. I think Mr. Fraser mentioned about these different sources, incubators and accelerators. Well, not so much incubators. I have shown that we'll discuss what these things are. And of course, small business loans are there. However, small business loans, as I mentioned, is very difficult unless you have a proven amount of cash flow and a definite cash flow, which is not always. And early on, it's almost always not the case. So, of course, there are development banks in Sri Lanka which would offer this sort of thing. However, not still you would require a certain amount of proof of payment or the ability to pay, which is always very difficult. So, a large amount of capital can be raised, I would say, by the first couple of sources. And of course, now we have crowdfunding as a source as well. We'll discuss what these things are. So if I talk about venture capitalists, so venture capitalists generally, as I mentioned, they are able to take on a large amount of risk. They consists of individuals as well as firms. Now it's mostly firms, I would say, large and I would say quite large and wealthy resource funds which have the ability to invest in startups. So they provide private equity in the sense these are not publicly issued shares; these are privately held shares that they provide. So they provide funding in the form of money in the exchange of a chunk of the company, and they would expect a fairly large chunk of the company, given the ability, given the fact that they are taking a substantial risk in initial in investing in a startup over there. So the venture capitalists generally specialize in spotting companies with great growth potential. And by definition, we know that most startups fail, and they are prepared for this. I would say from the statistics I have heard, it's almost 1 out of 10 startups tends to succeed, and maybe 7, 8, 9 tends to fail. So they are prepared for that kind of probability, and when they invest, they know that 90% of their bets will fail. However, the 1 or 2 that they are investing in, they expect them to do really well. I think kind of a success story that we've always heard is, of course, Facebook, which managed to increase their returns in a massive way the original venture capitalist funds that were provided to Facebook, they returned multiple fold of that and gave that back at the exit stage, which is when the venture capitalist capital fund tends to take away their money later on. So generally, they also provide technical or managerial experience. So as you know, as I mentioned earlier, founders are maybe specialized is in certain ways. They might be programmers, they might be engineers, etc. However, they may not necessarily know business or management aspects. But venture capitalists are able to provide expertise on this because they have been kind of veterans in these fields. They have done different deals across the industry, and they are able to provide important technical advice and expertise using their experience. So in Sri Lanka, we have venture capitalist firms. For instance, I have listed some there: Bluestone Capital, Browns Investments. You may have heard of these companies, maybe others as well. I've just given some examples. So these firms are there who would go and spot those companies with growth potential and try to invest. Angel investors are similar in many ways to venture capitalists, but in different in one very important aspect. That is that one is that mainly angel investors are individuals who have quite a lot of resources, and they have the ability to take on a risk and also identify companies that might work in the long run and may not work in the long run as well. So they are experts in certain industries, whereas venture capitalists would invest in different industries. Angel investors probably would fit into a couple of industries that they would look at, and also they have certain values as well that they are quite big on, like nowadays, things like ESG factors or environmental, social, governmental factors, governance factors have become important. So those things also may matter for depending on the particular investor here. So they would also offer, for instance, business connections, guidance before the launch, etc. And of course, they will probably provide a more personal touch because it's mostly, as I mentioned, individuals, and getting them on your side might mean that you can they can be champions of your product or business, etc. And you might have that additional edge as well. So internationally, Mark Cuban is well known as a angel investor. Jeff Bezos is a angel investor. You have examples like that who are well-known examples. In Sri Lanka, for instance, we have the Lanka Angel Network, Sri Lanka Investment Network, etc., who have angel investors who have got together and invest in these kinds of new startup companies as well. So they take a more active role, as I mentioned, compared to venture capitalist firms. So incubators and accelerators are also examples of I would say, kind of not funding providers always, but facilitators when it comes to startups. We hear these terms a lot. So incubators particularly is basically a place or a platform where they can different entrepreneurs can generate new ideas or incubate new ideas and transform them into commercial ideas. So they would offer incubators would offer advice, guidance, resources, etc. With business model, maybe with the product, maybe, etc. Right. So I think a very recent example is with the Road, which was an electric bicycle, which I think was done by Hatch, if I'm not wrong. So example like that are there in recent times where we have seen. However, they don't provide funding. If it's an incubator, they don't generally provide funding. That's a main differentiating factor between incubators and accelerators. Accelerators, on the other hand, they provide capital to startups, and they also provide other forms of advice technical help, etc., on kind of propelling the startup to later stages, if you like, by providing the necessary guidance. So accelerators try to accelerate growth, incubators try to incubate new ideas and create businesses, if you like. So some examples are John Keel's X, for instance. Hatch is another example. So these companies, these not, I would say, company. John Keel's X is a company. Hatch is not so much, but it's more of a kind of a not-for-profit that provides help in the form of incubation of ideas. So accelerators do provide funding. So incubators, I included it here so that we understand what they are, but incubators don't generally provide funding. So crowdfunding is also a good example of a new method, I would say. Crowdfunding like GoFundMe, Kickstarter, things like that. I think it's not just used for business nowadays, it's also used for other things like charities, for instance, use this to raise funding for various causes. So it's a method where we can easily raise funding using this platform online by, for instance, showing a certain cause, making sure the details are there, and we can raise funds accordingly. However, it is also used for funding a business. In fact, in terms of crowdfunding, up to about $5 million, according to the SEC, regulates the amount of crowdfunding that can happen in a business, the equity crowdfunding, that is. Up to about $5 million can be raised. So it's mostly, I would say, less than that. I mean, always it should be less than that because that's a limit. However, it is mostly for smaller amounts that crowdfunding happens. And in a business, the interesting thing with crowdfunding is that you don't necessarily have to give away your equity. So you can actually use crowdfunding by to give away maybe a revenue portion, for instance, without, or profit portion, or some other form of return to the investor rather than giving equity away. So it's a new, a novel method of funding, I would say, and it is in when it comes to regulation, crowdfunding is not it's not very clear as such yet. But I know, as far as I know, SEC in the US regulates it, regulates the equity part of crowdfunding. However, it's still kind of away from all the different jurisdictions because it's one of those methods where it doesn't have boundaries within. So it's good for sure smaller amounts of funding. Anyone who has an idea, who wants investors, can kind of use this type of funding. So it's like I said, it's good for smaller amount of funding as the slide says. However, for large amount of funding, crowdfunding might not be that much of a viable method, because if we need more than that, we need to go for something like an angel investor or uh, or venture capitalist. And the other main difference, I would say, is the technical expertise, because crowdfunding, you don't get any thing like that, because it's small amount of fundings collected, and it's not like we have somebody like angel investor with us who will provide the technical expertise. So stages of startup capital is something that we need to understand. It's something something we have to match, I would say, with the type of funding, because the stages of funding, it goes from pre-seed, where the business is kind of not not, I would say, the product doesn't have any business sense yet, but it's kind of still the idea is being formed over there. So over there, mainly they would focus on getting a patent, copyrights, maybe creating your pitching deck, etc., and trying to create the partnerships, etc. So over there, I wouldn't say, it's very difficult to raise any funds from outside, because you don't have a product or a prototype or anything like that at initial stages. So for the pre-seed stage, it will be probably, you probably may not require a lot of funding at that stage as well, depending on the product and the business, but it will be probably mostly bootstrapping and receiving money from family and friends, etc. When it comes to the seed stage, on the other hand, we start creating a prototype, and then we start slowly going out there, getting the business running slowly, and we may start to raise funds because we need funds for various stages. As I mentioned, pre-seed stage is still, we are conceiving the idea. It's not a, probably not a product yet. In the seed stage, we have a prototype, but it may not have all those commercial aspects yet. So we are trying to develop the product. So in that sense, we may try to raise funding in the form of by going to our investors to raise funds. So here we may use things like bootstrapping once again, but we might be able to approach early venture capitalists and angel investors if they really like the idea. If you can convince this to our angel investor, they may like the idea and they may help us and over there at the seed stage. But it's a very difficult stage to get outside funding, as I mentioned once again, because we still don't have that commercially kind of viable product. So Series A is where research and research happens in the industry and markets. We do a lot of marketing. We do a lot of research on our markets. Who is our target market? How do we approach them? How do we generate revenue? What is exactly our business model? We plan and we try to kind of plan ahead how we are trying to scale up our business. So most of the I would say the unique selling proposition, if you like, as well as the business model over there, how we are going to generate revenue, etc., is created over there. Because before that, we may not have the full idea over there, but here we are trying to fine tune that and make sure that that part is exactly clear. So over here, we may be able to maybe approach accelerators, some of the angel investors, venture capitalists, etc., because we probably have now a kind of a proven idea. We would have the necessary boxes ticked when it comes to approaching our investors and having the so-called value proposition and all of that, what Mr. Fraser mentioned, to go and reach our investors. Then it comes to Series B, of course. Series B is we need to expand consumer interest. So now we must try to, expand the market slowly. We must establish now commercial viability. So remember, in Series A seed stage, we are creating commercial viability, but by Series B stage, we should have established our commercial viability, and there should not be any question about commercial viability over there. And we must be able to scale our production and sales. We must be able to scale up. How we are going to scale up our production and sales should be a clear idea in the entrepreneur's head. And of course, venture capitalists can be approached at this stage. So new products and markets can come into play in Series C and beyond. For instance, we can now, our product is kind of has reached our customers. We are selling something. We are probably making some profit over there, or starting to see some profit over there. So Series C and beyond, we would try to establish new markets. We can establish a strong customer base. We maybe start, we might start to acquire the companies, target new markets, etc. So over here, we might be able to go to banks. Now, remember how I said initially it's difficult to approach banks. Now, over here, on the other hand, we probably have a product and a clear revenue stream to show the bank and say, okay, so bank or other debt providers to show that, okay, so this is our revenue stream. This is how we get our funds. So we should be able to fund our. We also can approach other institutions like private equity funds. One of the biggest in the world would be BlackRock, for instance. Blackstone is another one. And managed funds also we can approach like hedge funds in other countries. In Sri Lanka, we might have pension funds, for instance, like our EPF, for instance, or any other funds which would invest in businesses directly. We can approach in at this stage, Series C and beyond. So it's an established company by this time now. So mezzanine stage is the next stage where it's a bridging stage, I would say. It's not completely the company is not ready to go public yet, but it's somewhere in between a startup and a public kind of a company which is ready to go public. So so maybe the company will be acquired by another company, but otherwise the company will be preparing for initial public offering. And we can usually, at this time, you can approach maybe private equity funds, managed funds, or debt to raise funding until you go for the IPO. And the exit stage. Now, exit stage, we must understand here, exit from the startup capital stage is what we are saying. When it comes to the exit stage, does that mean the company is no longer there? No, that means simply it exits the startup stage and it becomes a public company, like well-known companies which are listed in the Colombo Stock Exchange. So these are the different stages and appropriate sources of funding that I mentioned earlier. So raising funding is not so much of a it's not an exact science, I would say, because it's about the product, it's about the market, it's about convincing the financiers, and a number of other things must come into effect. So if you look at the main characteristics of a investable startup, you have several different things that we can say. First one is, of course, the idea. The idea must be kind of a very clear idea, which captures the investor's attention, I would say. So it's an appropriate solution for something important. It has to solve something of a important problem, right? So as you know, Tesla, when they introduced their electric car, they were solving something important, right? So it's obviously we know fossil fuels are going out of fashion, and also it's a limited resource, so it won't last forever. So it's a problem. So Tesla offered this solution, which was a car which managed to sort that out in that sense. Uber is an example of kind of a solution being offered for an existing problem. So I think this was after 2008, after the financial crisis. People didn't have that much money at that time. So it was not the same as, particularly in other countries like cities like New York, taxis cost a lot. So in that sense, Uber offered a solution to reduce their costs while taking them to the necessary place as they wanted. So it's an appropriate solution for a problem which existed in reality. So of course, a unique selling proposition must be there. Unique selling proposition is basically something which differentiates a product from their competitors. So you must offer something which is solving a problem which is different from the competitors. It must be clearly differentiated from the competitors, because otherwise there might not be enough acceptance by customers in order to actually go ahead and buy your product. So it's important to make sure that the selling proposition, this is different, of course, from the value proposition which Mr. Fraser mentioned. The unique selling proposition, you must make sure that it is differentiated clearly from your competitors. And of course, market validation is another important concept. We call it market traction as well. So it's important that the market is kind of accepting you or validating you. How can we measure this? So we can measure this in initial stages using different metrics. One thing could be, for instance, looking at the growth in users. How much has users grown by? If it's a website, how many website visits have come in, for instance? So different metrics are there depending on the type of product you're offering. So for instance, if it's Uber, how many new users are using this product, or what is the growth in users, etc. So we must really understand whether the target market that we're trying to offer our product is actually taking a liking to the product. So using initial data, we can try to find that out using the methods or metrics I mentioned. So here you might not have revenue numbers initially. Initially, you might have maybe user numbers, etc., which will give you an idea of how people are actually taking a liking or kind of showing a growth in your business, which is an important aspect the business the investors would look at, because that translate usually to growth and a good investment in the future. So we can't show any profits at this stage, but we might be able to show, okay, the market validation is there and users are increasing at a rapid stage or something like that. Of course, the founder and the team are important. Who is the founder? Is the founder a person who is technically able to offer the product? In other words, what is his track record? Is he trustworthy? Has he done similar projects before? So that sort of thing obviously matters. And of course, the team, the team, for instance, if it's a software development company, we have to look at the team, their qualifications. Are they able to offer this sort of product, etc., is something that we need to look at as well. So we also have to look at things like media attention or social signals. Now we can even look at social media, what the social media is telling us about a product, for instance. Is it actually taking effect? The media, what is it talking about? Are they talking positive things about it or negative things about it? So we can look at these signals as well, and the investors do. And F is, of course, the pitch. So pitch, now this you may have seen in places like, Shark Tank, for instance, in the US, or Dragon's Den in the UK, TV programs where people go and pitch in front of a set of investors. In Sri Lanka, we had its counterpart called Atpower, where budding entrepreneurs can come and pitch their idea. So the pitch is something very important. So you can see we have a number of things the entrepreneur might not be able to control directly, but of course it's related to their product, etc. But the pitch is how they present the product. So this is done using a pitching deck, which is a slideshow which prepares the entrepreneur to go and pitch his or her product. It's important to understand that we must do the pitch very well as an entrepreneur in order to convince the investors. And finally, certain financial characteristics also may be important. Now, of course, company, as I mentioned, may not have a lot of profit, right? So, or may not have any profit in the early stages. So that's understandable, I think. Even as I mentioned, Tesla, I think in the early few stages, they didn't turn a profit. And we expect that sort of a thing, particularly in tech companies, because you have to invest a lot in the technology before it gives a profit. However, certain things might be important. For instance, the return ROE, or the return on equity, is something that necessarily you may not have in the initial stages, but it's something good to know. If you put in 100 rupees to the business, how much is that returning to you? Is something that investors look at in a more mature business. But in a startup, probably they may not have, but it's a good thing to know. Burn rate is a more important thing when it comes to startups. It's a very simple ratio, which is basically your cash balance divided by the monthly loss. So how much is the company burning cash in a monthly basis? So how much is cash is flowing out of the business in a monthly basis? In other words, how long will your cash balance last? before it runs out. So it's something important. The burn rate is something important, which shows the investor how well the business is doing with cash, and whether the cash that they provide will simply be burned out in a matter of few months. So these are important financial characteristics. I think earning stability and growth is another one. Earnings growth is how fast, or what is the rate of growth is of earnings is something which we can look at, or revenue or growth or earnings we can look at. Earning stability is another one. We can see how stable our earnings are. So it might not be much at initial stages, but are we getting a stable revenue? And maybe a stable growing revenue will be the ideal scenario that we want to have. So if you look at the ideal business that a investor would want to invest in, we can say it is a combination that solves a good problem, has innovation, of course, which gives an innovative solution, has a big enough market, and has a good team.
Venura.
So if yes,
Yes, Venura, we have Prashant also lined up. Would you mind
yes,
finishing in the
proceeding.
8:30
Sure.
also?
No
Yeah, all
problem.
right.
That's
Excellent.
I can
Thank
finish
you.
it off.
Thank you.
It's not a problem. Yes. So we can understand that different four different things combined gives us a product. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So I think in terms of a pitch, there are important things when it comes to a pitch. So first of all, your pitch must be short and concise. You should not take too long with the pitch. It must be clear, and it should not be rushed. It should clearly visualize the product and the problem. We should give a clear idea as to what we are trying to solve and what our solution is. And of course, it should show some soft skills as well. There are certain aspects which we will not be technical, like we should have confidence, should be clear in communication, should show leadership potential, because if the founder does not show leadership potential, how can you trust him or her to go through this and kind of deliver the results you want? Appropriate visual or sensory aids should be there, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. So the pitch probably will have these sections, and I have given some slides to you which will give you an idea of different companies like LinkedIn, Uber, Facebook, who had their pitching decks publicly available. So you can see, you can get an idea of how they have pitched their idea originally when it comes to venture capital funding or angel investor funding, etc. So distribution of equity, I think when it comes to distributing the owner's equity or the shares of ownership among different founders, it's important to understand some of these principles. For instance, who has provided more finance, who is the CEO, who had the original idea, who is working in the business more, etc. So when you divide equity among your funding providers or different sources of funding, as well as your founders, these principles will kind of play an important role in determining the amount of ownership that each person would get. So since I'm strapped for time, I'm not going to further. Thank you very much, Professor Singh, for giving me this opportunity. If anybody, I don't know whether I have time for questions. If not, I will stop. If so, I am happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Venura. I will make sure that the questions will be compiled together and send it to you over email and get the answers back to the participants. Because we are pressed on time, there's a very quick presentation from the next speaker about his own experience. He's one of those people who have successfully raised capital. So therefore, please wait for his presentation also. It won't take much longer. So Thank you, Venura, for your extremely valuable, important presentation. There's a lot of information for our participants today to take away to make their future uh, businesses, startups successful. All right, it's time to introduce our next speaker, Purnima.
Our third speaker for today is Mr. Prashant Premkumar, the founder and the group CEO of Cultivate. Cultivate is a startup currently operating in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh with the goal of digitalized supply chain for agri sector. Cultivate has recently raised 1.75 million US dollars as pre-series A funding. Before his tenure at Cultivate, Mr. Prashant has had a professional background in data science and has also been the head of business intelligence for AIA Insurance. He also has past startup experience and managing businesses in different sectors. And finally, Mr. Prashant Premakumar has obtained his MBA from the Postgraduate Institute of Management. So without further ado, I would cordially like to invite Mr. Premakumar to continue with the presentation. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Purnima. Am I audible? Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, Prashant.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Purnima. Thank you, Professor Rohan Munasinghe. Thanks for this opportunity. I understand we are slightly stuck on time, so I'll keep it brief. I'll keep my presentation very brief. But please feel free to ask any questions if you have any doubts. Just open it up. I would like to have a very interactive session if it's possible for the next 10 minutes. I'm not going to share any presentations today. I'm only going to share you my life experience. As Purnima mentioned, I have been successful as well as I have faced failures when it comes to fundraising in my short career. I decided to become an entrepreneur very early, but I came with a very strong background in data science, in mathematics and statistics. So although I started my career off in data science, I always had this urge to become an entrepreneur. It was my dreams, and I've had success and failures in this space, and I'm still a learner. Okay, I'm still learning in this process. If you're a startup entrepreneur, one thing you have to understand is the market space is changing. What used to be a trend 10 years ago was not the trend 5 years ago, but it's not what it is now. What used to be a startup trend 10 years ago, when it comes to fundraising or when it comes to investments or when it comes to investor sentiments, is very different to what it is now. For example, I'll tell you one example. 10 years ago, a startup that is losing money, even $10-15 million annually, will still be valued at very high valuations because that market potential was there. Today, that's not the case. Today, startups are judged based on what's your EBITDA, what's your operational profit or loss, and how containable it is. One example is if you look at Byju's India, a startup that was only a few months ago valued at $25 billion. Okay, you would have seen Shah Rukh Khan being the poster boy. Byju's, suddenly you see all the cricket matches. They are sponsoring the cricket T-shirts. They had TV advertisements running during high, prime time cricket sports entertainments, etc. So they were very highly valued, highly regarded, supposed to be taking over the Indian education ecosystem altogether at $25 billion. Today, if you check the news, they've come down to $5 billion valuation. That means they've gone down rounds. So the startup sentiments change very fast, right? My experience in 2015, when I started off my early startup journey, I initiated a startup into online grocery delivery, online supermarket. I was probably one of the first few to do that. And we started this company called Direct2Door, where we were connecting these small pullers, Kirlapana puller, Velvata puller, and all that, and buying from these small vendors, the puller, and delivering to households. So with the early stage startup, we had a good concept. We had some early traction, and went into one of these venture, something called a venture engine, a startup competition, where we pitched to multiple investors. And we got very early. We got picked up by some of the angel investors. I don't want to mention the names here. Very good individuals, very good professionals. But they picked up very early and they came in as angel investors. They were willing to invest $25,000 at that time. I think dollar was still at 130 or 140 at that time, right? So we had $25,000 investment and I had to dilute 7.5% equity. Okay, so in this company, I had 92% equity. I owned it. I had a co-founder who had around 5% as a employee stock option. So mostly around more than 85% was my ownership, my own shares. And we raised $25,000. That as a startup capital to build up this business model. But what I didn't realize was this was our inexperience at that time, right? $25,000 converted around 3.6 million rupees. That was only enough for 6 months to build a startup of that nature. I'm trying to disrupt the grocery business, right? Disrupt the supermarket business, bringing it digital, and it's in 2016, so it's much early, much before the COVID time. I think if we were there in COVID time, it would have been a different story. So we totally underestimated the cost that's required: logistics, fulfillment, marketing, customer acquisitions, all that. The business potential was there. There was a market need was there. There were customers who were willing to, we had very regular customers who were frequently ordering. We were having 25%, 30% month-on-month growth. So we had good growth story. Regardless, once we ran out of that $25,000, that 3.6 million rupees, when it came to raising new capital from investors, that's where we started hitting roadblocks. Investors were not ready to invest in e-commerce startup at that stage. Startups who had started before us, e-commerce startups, not necessarily grocery, even those who are selling mobile phones and TVs and fridges online, they have failed. Many of the e-commerce startups have run out of money and closing down. So the time that I was trying to raise capital in 2017-18, 2 years into my startups, I have bootstrapped and managed and put some of my personal money in and somehow managed it for 2 years. But when it comes to raising capital, I'm now knocking all the doors. I'm knocking the venture capitals. I'm knocking the angel investors, all the top people, right? Some of the biggest people who had plenty of money to invest. Everyone has had negative sentiments towards e-commerce, not necessarily my business. They were satisfied with my business, but they overall didn't have a opinion on the Sri Lankan e-commerce landscape. They thought, and to some extent they were right. Sri Lanka was not very ready for e-commerce. This is back in 2017-18. So despite approaching some corporates who are willing to now invest and take over the business, there were some venture capitalists who were still willing to invest. We couldn't raise capital. Okay, and ultimately I had to close down the business. I had to incur some losses. My investors lost out money, but still, till date, we remain as good friends, good partners, and we still work together on other projects. What I want to tell you there is, startups, you might be doing a good project. You might be running, you might be having growth month on month, but the market sentiments really matter. You might have early investments, you might have cleared it, but you need follow-up investments. So once you're into the startup space where you're raising capital, unless you are able to make profits very fast, which is a very unlikely scenario. Most of the startups is very difficult to make profits within the first 2 years. So unless you are able to build a business that can run on its own, that means you can bootstrap yourself or you can manage your working capitals within the funds that you're making as revenue. You need to make sure you have follow-up investments lined up, and you need to tap on investor doors very, very fast. This is something I learned the hard way. Ultimately, I lost money. My investors lost money, but I learned a lot. It gave me the reputation as a startup entrepreneur. Everyone I pitched, they liked my thought process. They liked my energy. And they were willing to work with me, but not on that e-commerce project. Okay. So after one point in 2018, I realized, okay, there is no future for this startup. I closed down. I shut down the business. I took the hit. It was a failure. I learned my lessons. I went into some corporate jobs to, just keep my exposure going, keep my income levels going, right? So luckily, since due to my background in data science, I was able to get good corporate jobs and move on with it. But the same investors who couldn't invest in my e-commerce business, when I pitched again 2 years down the line for an agri-tech startup business that I'm currently running, they were willing to invest because there they saw this was a niche area. There was a market potential. Sri Lanka is an agrarian country, and there is a lot of opportunity in agri-tech. They thought it was a green space, and they were openly willing to invest. So at this time, I didn't put any of my own money in. I went and raised this capital. And because this was an early stage idea, I was willing to give more equity out. So earlier, when I said 7.5% equity, this time I was willing to give more than 40 to 50% equity to the investor. I was willing to take a smaller portion as equity, comparatively. But with the confirmation that I have enough funds, I have enough money to run this business for 2 years. So I went out and raised 64 million rupees instead of 3.6 million rupees. That's the amount of investment that was required. I was willing to dilute more equity. That was totally fine. I made sure I had enough salaries. I made sure I had enough money to pay my developers, software engineer salary for the next 2 years. And we started developing a product. Within the first 1.5 years, from the time we raised our seed investment, very soon we were able to start revenue generating. So that was very important as well. We were able to start generating revenue in this business. The product got validated within 6 months. We had some growth, and then I went and raised my seed investment. So this was a pre-seed that I raised 64 million rupees. And then we seed investment with an intention of going for Series A in another 2 years. We managed to raise another 70 million rupees from various different investors. So at that point, I brought in two of the foreign investors also. I made sure there was a Japanese investor who came in, and there was another investor with links to European investment houses. I very carefully selected these investors because I know I'm going in for a larger round, and the follow-on investment is very important. So when you choose your investors, be very wise, be very careful. Do they have enough money to invest on your next round? If they don't have enough money, do they have enough networks, connections, or other partners that they can bring you as investors for your next round? So always plan your next round. One investment round, if it depends on your business model, but mostly one investment round is not enough. You need to do, as the previous presenters also presented you, a seed round, pre-series, pre-seed, seed, pre-series A, Series A, pre-series B, Series B. You can go any amount of investment rounds as long as your business is growing. So I felt I learned my lessons from my past where it went wrong. But this time I made sure I brought in the right partners so they can keep backing me again and again. And they actually did. So some of the investors invested again. So when I did my seed round, some of the investors from my pre-seed invested again, and I brought in 2 new investors, and I raised a round of close to around 70 million rupees, again diluting on around 20% equity from the total investment. And with that, we started looking outwards. We didn't want to stick just as a Sri Lankan business. We believe we built some good technologies that's used in agriculture sector. In Sri Lanka, by the time I had onboarded Haley's, I've onboarded Cargill's, I've onboarded Finlay's, some of the leading players in the agriculture sector. So it has to go hand in hand. One side, if you're a CEO, part of your energy, you got to look into developing your business, developing your product, developing your team. But almost 50% of your energy has to go into finding and convincing and bringing new investors. Then only you can grow as a business. If you want to scale your business, that's going to be very critical. So luckily, I think we started looking outward Sri Lanka and found an investor from Hong Kong with deep roots in Bangladesh who came in with the next round investment, along with some of the current investors. Recently, around 3 months ago, we closed investment of $1.75 million. I believe, if I'm correct, for an agri-tech startup in Sri Lanka, within a period of 3 years, we could be one of the few, or probably the only company that had raised a $1,750,000 investment. That too at diluting another 20% only. So we are currently valued at around $8 million. So the lessons that I can just share with you, I know we are very short of time, so what I can share with you is, if you are interested in startups, and if you are interested in scaling startups, make sure you put a lot of energy into investment fundraising. That will include a lot of networking, a lot of reaching out to people, preparing a very good presentation, having your narrative very solid. You should have a very good, solid story. You should be able to convince someone. Within days, you should be able to convince your story. You can't 10 slides. 10 slides will be very interesting once you go past your first 2 slides. Usually investment decisions are made in the first 2 slides. So if you are a startup founder who wants to build a very scalable startup, not as a lifestyle startup, right? Just put a lot of energy into your fundraising. Fundraising is what's going to make sure your business lasts, grows, and how big it grows. I'm still a learner. I'm only sharing you my very little experience that I have, but I think it's very valuable experience. I'm just sharing where I failed, where things have gone wrong for me, and where I believe things have worked out as well. But still, I think there is no certainties. The startup world is always changing. The investment ecosystem, investment sentiment is always changing. What used to be 2-3 years ago, if you're a startup, they value your valuation was based on your GMV, your top line. It's not anymore. Now they look at how soon you can be profitable, or are you already profitable. These are things you have to be aware of, how the investment market is. Sri Lanka doesn't have a lot of, at this point. I mean, especially 3-4 months ago, especially last year, Sri Lanka we didn't have much of a strong investor sentiments from foreign investors. But thankfully, it's slightly changing now. We are seeing a few investors ready to invest into Sri Lanka again, or Sri Lankan startups again. So if you're a startup founder, I think these are key areas that you all should be focusing on. So, Professor, as I promised, I kept my presentation very brief. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take it now, or anyone can please feel free to contact me by my email, or contact them. I'm happy to have my number. I'm happy to help you if any.
Yeah. So maybe just one quick question, Prashant, and the question is how to find a seed investor from a foreign country.
Okay.
Do you have any
So
quick
if you're
answer
a
for
seed
that?
investor, I saw the question. Yes. So it's critical you build a presentation, but you also have a one page deck. Okay. And there are investors in Sri Lanka who has links to foreign countries. And also you can seek out investors or on internet. Go to there are sites like there are websites like Pitch News, etc. There are several sites on venture capital news sites, etc. There are investors who have already invested in Sri Lanka. I can give you a few names as well. There's Striders Global, that's Atraxia Capital, and there is BOV Capital. There are a few other investors. I mean, I can't talk out of the top of the head. I could just give you a few names. These are foreign investors, either Singapore-based or European-based investors who have invested in Sri Lanka. So you got to reach out. You got to network. Be part of all these startup events. When you go there, you meet people. Even if you're not participating in the event, you can always. I mean, it's a startup founder's energy, right? You got to go out and have the guts to go and talk to the person and say, "See, I have an idea." You might get rejected then and there. You might get accepted, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't get derailed by failure. So it's your energy. You have to go out and reach out to these people. You can network. So if you have a one-pager, build a strong one-pager. The one-pager should communicate what your story is, what you're trying to build, what your traction is, and who you are. There are several investments that get picked up with one-pagers itself. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Prashant. It was
I'll
very, very
answer the next question
wonderful.
also. I think. Yeah,
All right.
somebody's asked,
Yeah.
what do you mean by lifestyle startup? Yes, lifestyle startup is if you're opening up a cake shop, okay, and you're passionate about baking, and you're opening a cake shop, right? That's a lifestyle startup. That's you're building a business that's you're passionate about. You want to open one restaurant, then maybe 2-3 restaurants, and you want to full-time run this business. That's a lifestyle startup. A scalable startup is you have a digital concept that's disruptive. And that can scale. So something like PickMe or Uber, these are scalable startups. So that's the difference. So if you want to do something very, very passionate about, and you want to open up a clothes boutique or a restaurant or a bakery or whatever it is, right? That's what you call a lifestyle startup.
Excellent. Again, thank you very much, Prashant. Your life experience is extremely important for our participants, and I'm sure it inspire all of us, right, to do better. So learn from the lessons, not only self, but from people like Prashant is of enormous value. All right. So all your questions, please send it to our common email address. You know it, because we don't have time to answer all of these questions. I think there are some questions remaining from Dr. Venura's presentation and also Prashant's presentation. So all of these questions, please send in to the email address so that I can compile them together and send it to Dr. Prashant and Venura and Prashant and get your questions answered. All right. So then again, I thank you very much for staying out of the timeline, 8:30 now. It's almost 15 minutes late. But anyway, you stayed focused. And we will wind up the session for today. And I hope to see you next Saturday, 7 o'clock. Thank you very much. Have a good night.